Look at your last grocery receipt. Now imagine the exact same cart, the exact same food on your table, costing half of what you just paid. In many Japanese households, that isn't a fantasy. It's a handful of ordinary grocery habits built into how shopping happens every single week, so quietly that nobody living it would ever call it a money-saving strategy. 10 habits, that's all it takes. Stay with me, because habit number 5 is the one most people actively avoid, even though it's probably costing them the most. After the final point, I'll give you one simple way to start on your very next grocery trip. This is Japan Life Simplified, where we explore small Japanese ideas that can make everyday life calmer, cleaner, and more intentional. Grocery spending is one of the few household costs almost nobody actually tracks closely, even though it's often one of the largest recurring expenses a family has. Rent gets negotiated, subscriptions get audited eventually. But groceries get bought the same rough way, week after week, on autopilot, which means the same small inefficiencies get repeated dozens of times a year without ever being questioned even once. That repetition is exactly why small habits matter more here than almost anywhere else in a household budget. A 5% saving on rent requires a difficult conversation. A 5% saving on groceries just requires noticing something different at the shelf. At the center of almost everything we're about to cover is a single Japanese concept: mottainai, a sense of regret over waste and a deep respect for the value of resources. It isn't about being cheap. It's about a simple, repeated question, asked before food is bought, cooked, or thrown away. Does this action actually honor what this food is worth? That one question, asked consistently, quietly reshapes an entire grocery bill over the course of a year, not through any single dramatic decision, but through the accumulated weight of dozens of small ones. Habit 1. Buying what's actually in season, not what's flown in from somewhere it isn't. Most modern grocery stores carry the same produce year-round: strawberries in December, tomatoes in February, regardless of what's actually growing anywhere nearby. People buy it because it's simply there, available, familiar, and the price rarely gets questioned against what it would cost in its actual season, sitting on the same shelf as everything else, with no obvious signal that anything unusual is happening. Here's what most people never notice. Off-season produce typically travels much farther, requires more storage and handling, and carries a meaningfully higher price simply to exist on that shelf in that month, none of which has anything to do with the food itself, its nutrition, or how it tastes. In many Japanese households, seasonal produce, what's called Shun, the peak moment when a food is both cheapest and best, is treated as the obvious default rather than a specialty choice. The principle isn't nutrition, though seasonal produce often tastes noticeably better. It's economics. Food costs less when it isn't fighting its own growing season to reach your cart, and that cost difference shows up on the receipt, whether or not anyone ever consciously notices it. The practical action is small. Before your next shopping trip, check what's actually in season locally and build one meal around it instead of defaulting to the same rotation of produce regardless of month. Habit 2. Buying specific items from specific specialized shops, not everything from one large store. A single supermarket trip feels efficient. One stop, one checkout, everything crossed off the list at once. But convenience and cost aren't the same thing, and a large general store often prices individual categories, produce, fish, bread, higher than a shop that specializes in exactly that category and nothing else. Picture two nearly identical fillets of fish, one sitting in a supermarket's refrigerated case among 50 other unrelated products, the other sold at a small counter by someone whose entire business depends on that one category alone. The second is very often both fresher and less expensive, simply because the overhead behind it looks completely different. In many Japanese neighborhoods, a small fishmonger, a specific produce stand, a local bakery, each independently priced and often fresher, remain common alongside larger supermarkets. The habit isn't about avoiding convenience entirely. It's recognizing that specialization tends to produce both better quality and a meaningfully lower price on that specific category, because the shop isn't spreading overhead across 100 other departments the way a large general store has to. The practical action doesn't require finding 10 different specialty shops. It's picking one category, produce, meat, or bread, and comparing the price and quality at a smaller specialized option nearby, even occasionally, to see what the actual difference looks like. We've covered what to buy and where to buy it. The next few habits move into how often and how much, which turn out to matter just as much as either of the first two. Habit 3. Smaller, more frequent shopping trips instead of one large, infrequent haul. A single big weekly shop feels efficient on paper. Fewer trips, less time spent, but it also means buying more than a household will realistically use before things spoil, especially with fresh produce, dairy, and anything perishable, quietly leading to food thrown away before it's ever eaten, often without anyone noticing exactly how much until the bin fills up again. A common pattern in many Japanese households involves shopping more frequently, sometimes every day or two, buying only what's needed for the next meal or two, rather than stocking up for an entire week at once. The overlooked mechanism is that food purchased closer to when it will actually be used gets used, while food purchased just in case for a week from now often doesn't survive that long in usable condition, regardless of how good the intentions were at checkout. The practical action isn't shopping every single day if that isn't realistic for your schedule. It's simply buying perishables in smaller quantities, closer to when you'll actually cook them, rather than defaulting to bulk purchases for anything that spoils. Habit 4. Building meals around what's actually on sale that week, not a fixed shopping list. Most people plan meals first, then shop for exactly those ingredients, regardless of price that week. It feels organized, but it also means paying full price on nearly everything, every single time, because the meal was decided before the prices were ever checked. A common approach in many Japanese households flips that order: check what's fresh, in season, and discounted first, then decide what to cook around it. The same nutritional variety, the same general categories of food, but built around whatever happens to be priced well that particular week, rather than around a list written days earlier with no idea what would actually be on sale. The practical action is a simple reordering. Before finalizing your meal plan, glance at what's actually discounted or in season that week, and let at least 1 or 2 meals form around that, rather than deciding meals in a vacuum and shopping to match afterward. We've handled what, where, how often, and how meals get planned around price. The next habit is the one most people actively resist, even though it may save more than any other single change on this list. Habit 5. Buying imperfect or near-expiry discounted food without hesitation. This is the one most people avoid. A slightly bruised piece of fruit, a vegetable with an odd shape, an item marked down because it's approaching its sell-by date. All of it typically sits untouched on shelves, while people reach past it for the normal-looking version at full price, often without ever consciously deciding to pay more. People do this because imperfect or discounted food feels, without any real justification, like lower quality, even when it's often identical in nutrition and taste, sometimes literally the same product, simply closer to its date or slightly less photogenic than its neighbor on the shelf. Mottainai applies directly here. A perfectly edible item discarded or ignored purely over appearance represents exactly the kind of waste the principle exists to prevent: waste of the food itself and waste of money spent buying its prettier full-price equivalent instead. The practical action is simple, if a little uncomfortable at first. On your next trip, deliberately choose the discounted, near expiry, or slightly imperfect option when it's genuinely still good, and notice that the meal made from it tastes exactly the same as it would have otherwise. Let that idea land for a second. A huge amount of grocery spending isn't about needing better food, it's about paying extra for food to look a certain way on a shelf, a cost that has nothing to do with what actually ends up on your plate. Think about the last time you passed over a discounted item purely because of how it looked, not how it would taste once cooked, seasoned, and served at a table. That single moment, repeated across dozens of shopping trips a year, adds up to a meaningful amount of money spent purely on appearance rather than substance. Habit 6. Using the whole ingredient, not just the conventionally edible part. Vegetable stems, herb stalks, the tougher outer leaves, small bits of meat and bone typically discarded without a second thought. Most modern cooking habits, shaped heavily by how recipes are photographed and presented, quietly train people to throw away perfectly usable parts of food they already paid for. Think of someone trimming the ends off a bunch of scallions and tossing them straight into the bin, purely out of habit, without ever once considering that those same trimmings could flavor an entire pot of broth for free. A common thread in Japanese cooking treats these parts as ingredients in their own right, added to broths, pickled, or prepared differently rather than discarded, extracting real value from food that's already been purchased, instead of buying something new to replace what got thrown away in the first place. The overlooked cost here is straightforward. Every discarded usable part is food you paid for and never actually used, which functions identically to overpaying at the register in the first place, even though it never shows up that way on the receipt itself. The practical action is picking one ingredient this week, an onion, a bunch of herbs, a piece of meat, and using a part of it you'd normally throw away, whether that's simmering vegetable scraps into a simple broth or finding a use for stems you'd usually discard without a second thought. We've covered buying habits and how ingredients get used. The final habits move into what happens after food is already in the house, which is where a surprising amount of waste and spending quietly happens. Habit 7. Strict pantry rotation, so nothing gets forgotten behind something newer. A pantry or refrigerator organized by whatever fits wherever there's space means older items quietly slide to the back, forgotten, while newer purchases sit up front getting used first. Eventually, the forgotten item expires, unused, and gets thrown away, representing money spent on food that was never actually eaten, discovered only when it's already too late to do anything but discard it. A common practice in many Japanese kitchens involves consistently moving older items to the front and placing new purchases behind them, a simple rotation that ensures nothing sits forgotten long enough to spoil. It costs nothing and takes seconds, but it directly prevents one of the most common, least noticed sources of food waste in an ordinary kitchen. The practical action is a habit, not a system. Every time you put groceries away, take 30 seconds to move older items to the front of the shelf first. Slow down here for a second, because this one is easy to underestimate. Open your own refrigerator right now, mentally, and picture what's likely sitting somewhere in the back, forgotten since a shopping trip 2 or 3 weeks ago. Most people can picture at least one item without much effort. That item is exactly the cost this habit is designed to prevent, quietly, every single week, without ever requiring a bigger grocery budget to fix. Habit 8. Turning leftovers into a genuinely new dish, not just reheating the same meal until it's abandoned. Leftovers reheated identically, meal after meal, tend to lose their appeal quickly, and once appeal drops, they often get pushed to the back of the fridge and eventually thrown out, representing food and money spent twice over, once for the original meal, and again for whatever replaced the abandoned leftovers. A common approach in many Japanese households treats leftovers as an ingredient for a new dish, rather than a repeat of the old one, transforming yesterday's rice into today's fried rice, or last night's vegetables into today's soup. The same food, reframed, tends to actually get eaten instead of quietly discarded once the novelty of the original meal has worn off. The practical action is choosing one leftover this week and deliberately turning it into something that doesn't look or taste like the original meal, rather than simply reheating it as is a second or third time. One honest caution worth naming here: this only applies to food that's genuinely still safe to eat. None of today's habits are an argument for ignoring food safety guidelines, expiration dates that reflect real risk, or your own judgment about something that smells or looks genuinely spoiled, rather than simply imperfect. The goal is reducing unnecessary waste, not taking on unnecessary risk. Habit 9. Buying only the portion actually needed, not the largest available size out of habit. But applied to perishables, buying more than a household will use before spoilage turns an apparent discount into food thrown away, which erases the savings entirely and then some, leaving the household worse off than if the smaller size had simply been purchased in the first place. A common approach in many Japanese grocery habits favors buying the amount that will actually be used, even if the per-unit price is slightly higher, because unused, spoiled food costs more in the end than a smaller, fully used portion ever does, regardless of how the math looks printed on the shelf label. The practical action is a simple gut check at the shelf. For anything perishable, ask honestly whether the larger size will actually be used before it spoils, not whether the per-unit math looks better on paper. And now, the final point, the one that ties every other habit on this list together. Habit 10. Consistency held every week, not one dramatic bulk buying spree. Every habit we've covered today is individually small: choosing seasonal produce, rotating the pantry, buying the discounted, slightly imperfect option. None of it looks like a major financial strategy on its own, and that's exactly the point most people miss when they picture saving money on groceries as one big, dramatic effort, a giant coupon binge, a once-a-year bulk buying weekend. The overlooked mechanism is that grocery spending isn't one large decision. It's dozens of small decisions, repeated every single week, for years. A single impressive bulk buying trip saves money once. The same small habits, held consistently, save money every week, indefinitely, without ever requiring a dramatic effort again. The practical action is a shift in expectation, not a new habit. Pick the single easiest habit from today's list, small enough that skipping it would feel strange rather than difficult, and hold only that one for your next 4 grocery trips before adding a second. We've now gone through all 10 habits: seasonal buying, specialized shops, frequent smaller trips, planning around what's discounted, choosing imperfect food without hesitation, using the whole ingredient, rotating the pantry, reinventing leftovers, buying the right portion, and consistency over dramatic effort. Here's what most people never notice until they see the full list together. Not one of these 10 habits requires extreme couponing or giving up quality food. What makes them add up is that they were never trying to be one big fix in the first place. Each one, on its own, might save a few dollars on a single trip. Repeated every week, for a year, they represent one of the largest, least dramatic financial shifts a household can make without ever feeling like a sacrifice. So here's a simple way to put this into practice, starting on your very next trip. Panskanleti, call it the one swap rule. Don't try to change everything about how you shop at once, which is the fastest way to abandon all 10 habits within a month. Choose exactly one habit from today's list, the one that felt most relevant while you were listening, and apply it on your next grocery trip specifically, deliberately. Notice what it actually saved, however small, before adding a second habit the trip after that. A lower grocery bill isn't built by one extreme, unsustainable effort, a single dramatic couponing weekend that burns out within a month. It's built by a series of small, repeated choices, the same choices many Japanese households simply never stopped making since long before saving money became a trend to chase online. On your next trip, choose your one habit and apply it before you leave the store. Which of these 10 surprised you the most? Tell me the number in the comments, and I'll read through them. If this changed how you think about your grocery bill, subscribe to Japan Life Simplified for more small Japanese ideas that create meaningful, lasting change without requiring you to overhaul your entire life at once. And if you know someone who's tired of watching their grocery bill climb every month, send them this. They've probably already tried the extreme version, a strict budget, a rigid meal plan, and watched it fall apart within a few weeks the same way most dramatic resets do. Sometimes the most valuable thing isn't a bigger budget. It's a smaller, smarter habit at the register, repeated often enough that it stops feeling like an effort at all. Found your grocery bill doesn't shrink all at once. It shrinks quietly, one small, deliberate choice at a time.